for something that you would rather not have,
Yeah.
which is usually wisdom. You know, it's funny. I was talking about that with the audience in Dallas last night. Somebody had asked me about prayer, and you know, they asked me if I prayed, and I thought, well, it depends on what you mean by that exactly. It's like I don't ask God for favors or for wishes, you know. But I do think that if you sit on the edge of your bed and things aren't going very well for you, and you ask what foolish thing you're doing to make it worse, that you'll get an answer right now. And it won't be the one you want, but it might be the one that if you listen to would set things straight. I think that's I don't think that I've ever been in a situation where if something wasn't going right for me and I sat and thought, okay, all right, I'm willing to figure out what I'm doing wrong, which is a big thing to think because you never know how much you're doing wrong. It might be something that you really don't want to contend with. But if you clear some space to meditate on that, the probability that you'll figure out something that you did that was stupid, that's bending you and twisting you in the wind, you'll get an answer very, very rapidly.
I remember, for me, prayer is one of those things. It's like in case of emergency, break glass. Like in case of emergency, start praying. And I'd love to actually use that practice when times are more calm and not when it's like the absolute last resort. But in those situations where I've just had no other way that my mind could figure anything out, no other way that I could see any sense of clarity, any sense of direction, any way out of the current state of chaos or conundrum that I'm in, then I'll start to pray. And it's this deep, like, just please, like, give me like any kind of clarity, any way to see out. And like you said, remarkably, that wisdom comes through some little thing.
It's funny. I mean, obviously, if you have a problem and you think about it, you can think up a solution. And it's not obvious how you do that. I mean, it's not like how you're manipulating your neurons or something. Mm-hmm. It happens of its own accord in some sense, like you can participate in it, I guess, and you can interfere with it, and it seems to take a certain amount of willpower, but it still all happens mysteriously behind the scenes. And I would say this sort of attitude towards, let's say, prayer that we're discussing is just an extension of that. And it's something like, well, you admit that there's a problem first, and then you ask for the minimum necessary intervention, which would be, all right, well, I'd like to move forward on this, some small amount that someone like me could actually manage, and I'd be willing to carry it out. And then you reorient the way you're thinking as a consequence of that, and something usually pops out of the abyss to guide you. Yeah. It's very strange, but it's not really any stranger than the fact that we can think at all, because the fact that we can think is actually very strange. Mm-hmm. It's strange like the fact that we can dream is strange, and that's strange beyond belief that you can dream. And or that something in you dreams, which is a much better way of thinking about it, because it's not like you're really in control of your dreams. Yeah. They just sort of happen. So
I think people can get kind of also tripped up in this idea that it's the external God that you're praying to necessarily, and it's an external force outside of you that's piping this wisdom straight in through your ear holes, and that's where it's coming from. But when you pray, you could also be praying to that higher part of yourself, that divine spark inside yourself, the higher wisdom that you hold. And I don't think there's really a necessary distinction that you have to draw from there. This could be just you surrendering to your own higher wisdom, saying, look, I'm stuck in this hedge of mazes. I can't figure it out. Is there some illumination that can help me, at least point the first step in that direction, and then I can start to plod my way through. And that's, universally what happens. But you have to almost admit, like, okay, I'm stuck.
Yeah, well, that's it. That's why in most religious systems, humility is stressed, right? Because humility says, I have a problem and I'm stuck. And humility says, whatever I'm doing isn't working and therefore I'm wrong. And so like as soon as you say that, and you don't have to get metaphysical about it except
and in my case, I not only say it, but I'm usually weeping in deep pain and laying on the ground.
Right.
Like, why?
Well, then you're really saying it.
Yeah. Then you mean it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. Right. And so, what you do in some sense psychologically is you admit to yourself that your current frame of reference is faulty. And then you start opening the door to a different kind of thinking, which is more creative thinking. It's more lateral thinking. You think, well, I'm wrong, but that's not necessarily a problem because I could be right if I thought some other way. Well, that's great. Often it works.
Yeah.
And there's there's almost no end to the utility of trying to figure out which ways that you're wrong.
Yeah.
Because there's lots of them. And every time you discover one, then you don't have to be quite so wrong anymore. That's a really good deal.
Yeah.
One of the things I was trying to stress in 12 Rules for Life, and also in this first book I wrote, Maps of Meaning, is that you need to decide at some point in your life whether you're more in love with what you know or what you don't know. And people tend to be in love with what they know because you don't want to have that shaken and challenged, and it's not surprising. But the problem with that is that you don't know enough. Unless everything's going perfectly for you, and everything around you set in order perfectly. It's like your ignorance outweighs your knowledge. It's like, so you should make friends with what you don't know.
And even what you know, you'll forget, and you'll need to like reimagine that in a different way and use a different metaphor and understand it. Because, in that deep prayer, in the same story, I'm in New York in this hotel room, everything's gone to hell, and I just can't find my way out. And the message that came through, without getting into the specific details, was the sun does not measure its light by the shadows that it casts. And I never thought of that metaphor like that,
So
And
did you?
So
what
basically,
happened
I was measuring my own worth and my own validity as a person by the external things that were happening,
right.
the consequences of my acts, like what was going on.
Yep.
And I was using that to create my own hell of unworthiness and my own hell. And then so that metaphor came in, like the sun does not measure its light by the shadows that it casts.
That's a hell of a poetic statement, that.
Right.
Yeah, it's a good one.
And I was like, oh, shit. And then from there, that so this was a 5-day descent into hell that kind of crescendoed in this moment in the hotel room. And then that one statement, which I'd never imagined that before, it seemed greater than anything that I could think of at the moment.
Oh yeah, it's a good one. It's really poetically put.
Yeah, then led me out, and that's led me through since then, honestly.
Right. It's also not self-evident what it means.
Right.
It has to be unpacked. I have a chapter about that, right, which is compare yourself to who you were yesterday and not to who someone else is today. It's the same basic idea, right, is that you have to get your markers for success right, because otherwise you can end up in the situation you described, which is that, like, there's always people out there who are doing far better than you on pretty much anything you want to imagine. And if all you're doing is seeing yourself in their reflected light, let's say, then it's going to be pretty damn dismal. But it's not a good comparison, because you shouldn't just compare. Well, first of all, there's danger in just comparing yourself to others, period, because they're not you, and God only knows what struggles they had to undertake to get to where they were, or what burdens they're currently carrying that you're not aware of. You just don't know any of that. But you can certainly contrast yourself with yourself, and that's a lot better.